Hi, I'm Samuel Prather, founder of Go Music and Reason user since 2003. Welcome to A Reason to Create. Today I wanted to address the touchy topic of whether or not today's music is better or worse than music that we grew up listening to or our parents grew up listening to. I've been seeing a ton of comments basically along the lines of, oh, this stuff is trash, it doesn't take any skill to make, etc., etc. And I wanted to kind of delve into whether or not there's any truth to that. And I know you probably think you already have the answer to that before you watch this video, but I would at least tell you to listen to what I have to say on the topic before you kind of set things in stone. So just to be fair to younger generation's music, those of us that have been here for a little bit longer have to admit that there's an emotional attachment that we have to music that is part of the soundtrack of our lives. So the stuff that you listened to when you went to prom, or the song that was on the radio for your first kiss or your first dance at your wedding, is going to have an unfair advantage that's not really based objectively on whether something is actually better or not. There are some things that legit have changed. There is less density in the music, there's less notes, there's less chord changes, and also less different timbres, that you can find in a typical pop song now than you could before. But we still have to be careful about just saying objectively that a whole generation's music is bad. One, I think it's pretty universal that every parent has hated their kids' music. I think that goes back to the beginning of recorded music. I don't think my grandmother was a fan of my mom listening to James Brown when he came out, and I don't think she's a fan of the Notorious B.I.G., for example. So there's definitely a generational divide that we have to keep in mind so that we're comparing apples to apples when we talk about this. And to that point, we also, as older generation folks, have to take into account that our relationship with profanity is different than this generation. They've just heard a lot more of it in a lot more places, in a lot more situations, so it's just more commonplace. So when I hear somebody say a bad word in something, that kind of immediately sets off a kind of parental flag, but I think that we shouldn't let that stop us from objectively judging the quality of music as a whole. And while we're talking about the parental lens, let's not forget how raunchy the music that we listened to growing up was. I know as far as my parents' generation, there were songs like Dr. Feelgood, and Aretha was not talking about going to a doctor for a checkup. I think about songs by the Ghetto Boys and Mystical and some other hip-hop artists that I listen to that definitely are just as bad, if not worse, than anything that I would tell my kids to turn off right now. The other thing I wanted to address is traditionalism versus pushing the music forward. And it's always easier to make a song that somebody likes when you're doing something that they've heard before. It's a much harder sell to get everybody on board with something that's completely different. And generally speaking, when you think about history is much kinder to people that innovate in music rather than those who preserve tradition. I think about two of my favorite jazz piano players, right? Oscar Peterson is one of my favorites, probably the first that I heard that I really fell in love with his playing. And then Herbie Hancock, who I also really dig his playing and his creativity as an artist. But their two careers are completely different. Oscar Peterson's records are largely the same in terms of timbre and instrumentation. It was almost always a piano trio that he used when he recorded. Now there were some exceptions where they added maybe strings or he had some guests, but that was generally the foundation of his recordings. Herbie Hancock, on the other hand, used a ton of different configurations and setups for his records, so they had a very different sound from his records in the 60s versus his records in the 80s or in the 2000s, for example. So Herbie definitely incorporated music that came along like hip hop and R&B soul into what he was doing, as well as world music and things like that. I'm not saying that Herbie is better than Oscar Peterson because of that, but what I am saying is that I think that Herbie is better known because of that. And I might be wrong, but generally speaking, I know a lot more people know of Herbie Hancock than they do Oscar Peterson, despite both of them having enormously impactful careers on the music. Now, it might seem like I've been just picking on kind of those of us that are in the older generations that don't like younger music, but what I will say also is that if you are a younger person making music, please go out and check out what came before. With all the technology that is available today, there's really no excuse for you not to check out all the great recordings that will help you make music that does have more tone, color, timbre, better pitch accuracy, and things of that nature that are just objective measures of music. So don't just leave the whole research part out. It's a lot of fun to find out about that stuff, and it makes your music better if you have a bigger pool to pull from. And for the same reasons, those of us that have been playing professionally for a while can't dismiss everything that's simple or that we don't understand as being bad music. I have a challenge for you. If you don't like a genre of music, pick a popular piece of it and transcribe it and play it verbatim. Now, the reason I say that is a lot of times the reason why other people like that music won't be apparent to you until you make an effort to play it. I absolutely hated Thelonious Monk's music until I tried to play some of it, and then I realized, oh, this is why people like it. It sounds simple, but it's really, really challenging. I think exactly the same is true in a lot of cases when it comes to music that we don't like as older musicians listening to the radio. We say, oh, it's this poppy candy garbage, and I don't like that. It's so simple, it's stupid, it's not well educated, anybody could make it. But don't say that anymore unless you can make it. And that's not something that you can really prove until you've actually tried to do it. Could you make a beat that would work for Fetty Wap or Nicki Minaj or, one of these bands that you say has no content? Could you make a hit for Cardi B? I'm not saying you would want to, but you need to be able to say objectively, yes, I can mix, master, produce a beat like that before you say that all the beats like that you hear are garbage. I remember when I was a little younger, I was talking to a great musician, Gary Granger, about the same thing. And he said something along the lines of, don't assume that your taste in music is better than millions of other people. So I think the challenge here as experienced musicians is to discipline ourselves not to prejudge things for not sounding like something that we already like. Once we've been gigging for a while, maybe have a degree, have been teaching for a decade or so or something along those lines, it's really easy to put ourselves and our taste in music in this ivory tower where we think that we know better than everybody else about what they should and should not like. I'd actually argue that sometimes all the stuff that we know, all our experience that we bring to the table sometimes gets in the way of us being able to recognize when something new is great, because we're looking at it through a lens that doesn't factor in kind of things that are different, and we don't judge it fairly. Now, I will address the flip side of that argument, which is millions of people can be wrong and have been wrong in the past. There are tons of things that we can point to in history where a consensus of the general public was that something was good and it wasn't. There's definitely a real argument to be made on the decline of music education and its role in the type of music that is popular. Unfortunately, if people aren't exposed to music, especially music of any kind of complexity until a certain age, then they're not very likely to pick that up later. So there definitely is something to be said about the argument that just people's appetite for better music has declined because people's ability in aggregate to even understand it has declined in recent years. And just as a side note, it is not an excuse to play these genres of music badly just because we don't like them. If there's a certain genre of music that you just can't stand, you need to spend enough time with it so that you understand what other people like about it, or I would just try not to play it, because you can't insult people by doing just bad impersonations of the music that come from an insincere place. Don't let technical things like intonation, timing, composition block you from understanding why the average Joe on the street likes a song. I sincerely hope everybody watching this makes a hit in their lifetime that is widely accepted as a great song and sets them up for retirement, but it becomes much and much less likely that you'll be able to do that if you've already blocked off what 75% of the country thinks is good music. I know what I'm saying probably hasn't made me any friends today. I have both the younger generation and the older generation probably mad at me for saying it, but if you are younger, remember what it feels like when older people dismiss your generation's music. And for the love of God, don't do that to the next generation when they invariably come up with music that you think is trash. If you're older, maybe think back about how wrong your parents were about the music that you listened to. All those artists that they said will just be fly-by-nights and will be gone, and that are timeless parts of your record collection and that you still enjoy to this day. The last thing that I'll say about this topic is, if you don't like the landscape of current music, then make some of your own. Don't just stand on the sidelines and talk about how bad this generation's music is. Make something for them to look up to so that they can see what good music is supposed to sound like. One thing I know for sure is that the music is not going to get any better if all the people with the knowledge of what music has been in the past have a wall between them and the people that are trying to make music in the future. Hopefully you learned something, maybe some perspective that you can use as an instrumentalist or creator of content in your own work. If you did learn something and like the way I explained it, then please hit the like and subscribe button and the bell so you know when I come out with new content. I have some more in-depth tutorials on how to create new stuff coming out soon, so just kind of work with me and be patient. Until then, I am Samuel Prather. I hope I gave you a reason to create.